Okay, but anyway, so what did we find? So the mean of this variable is 27, 0.27, so about 27, 30% or so in the control group, and about 9 percentage points lower in the treatment group. Okay, so that's the key result. So it seems like the audits reduced them by 9 percentage points. If you think I got those alphas, those loss ratios right, and you want to take these numbers seriously, that means that we reduce corruption on average by about a third. And kind of equally on materials and labor, pretty much. Questions? Okay, so there's a question, though, which is, there should be something which is a little puzzling, right? Which is, we said, look, we told you for sure we were going to audit you, right? And we made that really credible. And yet 19% of the funds were still missing in the treatment group. So why is that? What does that mean? Yeah.
I had a question. How do we know that the auditing agency is not corrupt itself?
We don't yet. It's a great question. I'm going to show you some evidence on that. In fact, that's the next slide. Yeah, it's the next slide. So I'm going to get. It's a great question. Exactly. So maybe, going back to the point I said before, maybe the auditors were corrupt. So just because sending the auditors in didn't mean I was going to get detected and punished, it might just mean I have to pay the auditors. Yeah.
Would the potential cost of getting caught still be less than that 19%? Can they still get some?
Exactly right. So I think there's two big. There's right. So one is maybe they're corrupt. Another is maybe they don't get punished very much. Maybe the punishment's pretty small. Right? We didn't really say. In the model we said W minus V, whatever it is, but we never said what how big the punishment was. And there's a third thing also. Any other reasons? So the third reason is just because the auditors came doesn't mean you're punished with probability 1, right? The model was conditional on being corrupt, like what probability I'm punished, right? So this argument I made here, this would be true if I was punished with probability 1, right? And the punishment was, they at least took away the rents you got from the job. But just because the auditors come doesn't mean I'm necessarily punished, right? Maybe they don't find anything. So we can look at that a little bit. So we have data from the auditors. So were they corrupt? So we can't tell for sure, but here's what we can do. We can say, look, we had the auditors fill out a little checklist when they were there of here's what we thought how the road looked, physical score, and then we looked at the books, and here's what we thought the books were. And we had our own independent team, not the auditors, our own people, the civil engineers and their compatriots, fill out the same checklist, not having seen the auditor's data. And then I can compare them. And lo and behold, what the engineering team says their physical score of the road is strongly correlated with the physical score of the road from the auditors. And the administrative score of the auditors, like how good or bad their books were, is strongly correlated with how our team scored the administrative score. And in places that had a better administrative score, they had less that we measure as missing. Right? So it doesn't sort of say, that doesn't say never they took bribes, but at least says their data isn't completely fabricated. Right? It looks like they're detecting something real. Is that clear so far? But if you look at what they found, and they always found something. 98% of the time, 90% of the time they had some finding. And we read through their audit reports and coded up all their findings. Said, well, here, what did they find? And 80% of the time they said something was wrong with your administration. But if you look at what they found, a lot of the things they found I would categorize as suspicious, but not necessarily like I can throw you in jail for that. Right? So they said, well, gee, your daily expenditure ledger was not in accordance with procedures. Right? That's not great, but or your procurement, insufficient documentation of receipts. Lots of people didn't have receipts. Now, if you just took money out of the till or whatever, you wouldn't have receipts. So that's suspicious. On the other hand, I lose receipts all the time. Not all the time, but I occasionally lose receipts. And it's not because I'm stealing money, it's just because the receipt fell out of my pocket or whatever. And these are villagers keeping track of sort of a bunch of complicated road projects. It's not implausible they would lose receipts for other reasons. And a lot of the things have that feel, which is they are suspicious, but not necessarily the kind of thing that you could put someone in jail for. And so just because the auditors came and discovered something didn't mean they could punish them with probability 1. And in fact, they punished them quite rarely. So one last kind of result on this paper, which is kind of interesting, which is about substitution. So there's different kinds of ways you can steal. This was about sort of stealing money directly from the project. So that's what we were auditing, right? Did you steal money from the project? So another thing you can do if you want to take money from the project is you can hire your family members, right? You can say, well, gee, I've got these jobs. Why don't you come and work on the project? I'll pay you some wages. Maybe you don't have to work that hard, something like that. And it turns out that's sort of difficult for the auditors to figure out, in part because this is in rural Java. In rural Java, there's not like an official naming convention. So people don't really have like last names. Right? So if you've ever seen articles about Indonesia, you'll often say, said, Budi, who goes by who only has one name. So it's pretty common. Like Suharto, who was the general in charge of Indonesia for many years, had only one name. He was just Suharto. That was his name. Sukarno, also the first president of Indonesia, was just Sukarno. So it's reasonably common. Plus, and even if you have multiple names, they don't necessarily follow your father or mother's name or whatever. They're just like whatever name your parents wanted to give you. So it would be hard, even if the auditors wanted to figure out who was related to who. Okay? But what we did is we ran a survey. We asked them if they worked on the project for pay. And then we asked them if they were related to any members of the village government or the project team. Okay, and then we're going to run this regression, which is, did you work on the project? We're going to regress if you worked on the project as a function of whether you were in an audited village, whether you're a family member, and the interaction. Okay, so how do I interpret the interaction in Gamma 4? What is that telling us?
The additional effect of being a family member on the effect of being audited on working.
Right? Okay, so and what does that mean? Can you use Gamma 4 in a sentence?
No.
Someone else want to try?
Gamma is the marginal effect of being audited and having a family member that's part of the government.
Right, on working on the project.
On working on the project.
Okay, so what does that mean? So substantively, what do I mean? So I'm talking about sort of this substitution margin where sort of like I hire my family members in response to the audits. What should I expect Gamma to, what's the sign for Gamma 4?
Well, you would expect it to be negative, because if you're going to be audited, you kind of don't want to be caught from nepotism.
Right, okay, so if Gamma 4 is negative, then you think that I'm auditing right, so if Gamma 4 is negative, you'd think I'm auditing the project for sort of stealing. They're also going to check for nepotism. Yeah. So you think that corruption is compliments. Yeah. Would be Gamma 4 is negative. What if Gamma 4 is positive?
Yeah, so nepotism is hard to measure. Maybe you shift to nepotism because you're worried about the other.
Right, so maybe if nepotism is really hard to measure, I'd rather just steal the money directly, but if they make that really difficult, I'll do this other form of corruption. So it's not actually ex ante obvious, which it is. Could be that they're complements. I say, gee, they're going to crack down on everything. I stop everything. Or I say, well, these two different forms of corruption are substitutes. And so if one of them is going to become harder, I'm going to do more of the other one. And Gamma 4 sort of tells us what that is. And the way I would use that in a sentence, I'd say, look, if Gamma 4 is telling us how much more family members are likely to work in audited villages relative to control villages. Right? So it's a little easier if you say it with respect to the other one. I mean, it is the same, but you could say, look, Gamma 3 is telling us how different family members are from normal people, and Gamma 4 says how different are family members in their likelihood to work between audited villages and non-audited villages. So this is the table. So here you get audit, family member of village government, or family member of the project head, and here you get the interaction. So lo and behold, right, family members of village government are much more likely to work in the project in audited villages. Family members of project heads are even 14 percentage points more likely to work on the project. And in general, people are only 30% of people work on the project anyway, so they're almost double as likely to work on the project in these audited villages. So that's consistent with the second story. So either one could have been true ex ante, we didn't know, but it seems like it's consistent with the second story. They're substituting from one corruption margin to another. So to conclude, what did we see from this study? We saw that it did reduce corruption by about 8-9 percentage points. I didn't tell you this, but it increased the actual quantity of materials rather than just decrease the prices, so it looks like maybe it had efficiency implications. On the other hand, it didn't go to 0, right? And that could be because just because I audit them with probability 1 doesn't mean they detect them with probability 1. It doesn't look like it was because the auditors were corrupt. It just looks like maybe they didn't necessarily find something all the time. And we have to think about sort of substitution margins from kind of multiple, I have multiple different choices of how I can be corrupt, and I might be able to substitute from one to another. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you all very much.